Hey there! Welcome to the 5th video in my self-development guide for the 2020 era and beyond. I said a while back I'd do an intermediate or advanced video every 3 or 5 videos. Well, this is that video. I wouldn't quite consider this one advanced, more on the upper side of intermediate. Everything up to this has basically been a warm-up, so let's get right into it.
I've seen some other mainstream videos on Stoicism on YouTube, and they have really nice production value, but either misunderstand Stoicism or barely dip their toes into it. Their main focus is on the video looking pretty and getting views, not really the content itself. This channel is all about content first, production value second, though I'll continually increase the production value over time as my channel grows. Stoicism is often simplified as the art of being tough, the art of being resilient, but it's so much more than that. It's certainly not being emotionless. Stoicism's main modus operandi is living your life with wisdom as the highest virtue you can achieve, making all of your decisions in a wise way. But again, that's just barely getting into this philosophy. Philosophy itself means love of wisdom. Stoicism believes that you'll endure great hardships, hard times personally, hard times from the world itself, physical cuts and bruises, mental scars, and that through this you must remain standing with fortitude. Stoicism is an incredibly useful philosophy for the world in the 2020 era and beyond. I don't think people quite understand just the way things may go. You need to be ready for the worst possible scenario you can imagine with society. If you can withstand a possible societal collapse, you can withstand anything. I'm not saying that will happen for certain. I am, however, saying it's possible, has happened before, and a good way to do things is to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. I'm not going to necessarily turn you into an optimist on this channel. People often mistake me for being an optimist. I'm not. I describe myself as a realistic optimist if you have to label me that way. I hope things turn out well, but I certainly don't expect it. Not when people are the way they are. But I'm also able to continue in my life even during times that I have zero optimism. Sometimes you just have to put one foot in front of the other despite how you feel, and Stoicism certainly helps with that. A big idea of Stoicism is never to do anything without a purpose. Ideally, you want everything guided by the ultimate virtue, wisdom, the idea to discern between good and bad decisions for your life. It's about living with real virtue, not false virtue, and there's a ton of false virtue around these days, especially on Twitter. You must uphold your morals and virtues regardless of the actions or lack of action from other people around you. Stoicism was started by the Emperor Zeno in 301 BC and was originally called Zenonism, a cooler name if you ask me. Zeno was inspired to create Stoicism because of Socrates' philosophies. Everything comes from somewhere. Zeno was considered so great that the Athenians gave him an official decree considering him to have outstanding virtue and self-discipline, and he was given a golden crown. Stoicism actually has some roots in Cynicism, which is not the cynicism you and I usually think of. Cynicism was an ancient philosophy which basically was about living as simply as possible, only drinking water, only eating soup and beans, only wearing simple clothes, and purposely enduring extreme hardship to make yourself a lot tougher and learn a lot by experience. I certainly don't live like that, but some have to just to survive. If you had to live like that, I wonder how long you could. Could you last a month like that? 3 months? A year? A question to ask yourself. The classic question of Socrates is, how does someone live a good life? Stoicism is very focused on this as well. Without guiding principles, most people go through life having no idea what they're doing or why, besides the gotta pay the bills cycle. It aims to be an art of living and create warriors of the mind. Stoicism, just like Eastern philosophy, also focused on meditation. Meditation is insanely important, and thinking it's only stress relief is only understanding a small part of it. Another large goal of this philosophy is to have you attain eudaimonia, which is a Greek word that means supreme happiness. Stoics believe that having virtue and honor is the only true good, which differs from other philosophies. Back to Socrates and Zeno for just a second. Socrates was revered as the most self-controlled man and was able to endure extreme heat and extreme cold, and willingly sought it out. Socrates is quoted saying, "Self-discipline, above all things, is what causes pleasure." I would add to his quote there that self-discipline is what creates long-lasting pleasure rather than short-term pleasure. Keep in mind, when you're hungry, even the most plain meal can taste amazing. Socrates also believed that we should stay fit at the very least, but Socrates would have strived for you to get to your peak physical condition at some point in your life. To anyone who can't do certain physical things, I apologize, but that takes a lot of stoicism in its own right. This is a good time to quickly mention that while I strive to make my videos as universal as possible, I am a guy, a straight one, so everything will come from there. If I say anything about masculinity, if you're a girl, make sure it works for you. Some girls do very well going full feminine, some do well throwing some masculinity in there, some do well maxing out both. Just adjust these videos as necessary. I thoroughly believe you can be very feminine while having masculine drive. Zeno's belief of achieving eudaimonia, supreme happiness, is that you have a smoothly flowing life, a life where your mind adapts smoothly to any change that befalls you. According to this philosophy, we should also live in agreement with nature. They also believe you should achieve human excellence through virtue. Stoics believe we were actually born with the responsibility to excel by perfecting our own nature. This is something I believed in even before I discovered Stoicism, so it's awesome that there's a philosophy that agrees. Stoics believe that what separates us from animals is our ability to reason, and that that's what lets us achieve excellence. Though I'll go ahead and say, in my opinion, many more things help you excel, but reason ruling them all is how the Stoics operate. The greatest virtue is wisdom for the Stoics, so what's the greatest sin? For them, it's ignorance. I find that to be an interesting one for them to pick. Basically, it's the idea of letting evil prevail and either not knowing about it or pretending not to know about it, or not knowing about how to live a good life. We live in the information age these days, so it's very much your choice about what life to lead, and you have all the tools you need to go as far as you want on the internet. Ignorance is a choice after you become an adult. The Stoics believed there to be 4 cardinal virtues: fortitude, prudence, justice, and temperance. The Greek words for these are Sophia for fortitude, Dikaiosune for justice, Andrea for courage, and Sophrosune for temperance. I don't expect everyone watching my videos to be a scholar. I'm trying to help the average Joe who stumbles upon these videos just as much as people further along, so I'll often define words. A cardinal virtue is a virtue of mind and character believed to be required to live a good life. Fortitude is all about strength, endurance, stamina, resilience, and the ability to face the unknown and frightening things in the world. Prudence is summed up in a basic way as the ability to discern the appropriate course of action to take in a situation at the appropriate time. Justice is about seeking out fairness and righteousness. Temperance is central to self-development in general. It can easily just be called self-discipline. Other things to add to it would be self-control, restraint, discretion, and doing things in moderation. Moderation is part of why I'm a centrist in the first place. I really do live by that motto, everything in moderation, and consider it a universal truth. Epictetus, a Stoic philosopher, believed that it's up to us, it's up to you, to figure out what's within our power to control in our life and what isn't. The good you can do lies in your sphere of influence. Your sphere of influence will start out tiny when you're born, but as you grow it expands, and with the internet it's entirely possible to make your sphere of influence as big as a nation or the world if you want to. But you can also keep it pretty small, which is perfectly fine, seriously. Worry about what's within your sphere of influence first, and then worry about the world later. Even if a meteor is about to hit the planet, it's where you are locally that determines what you have to do. And then even more importantly, it's you yourself that determines what to do in that situation, which practical wisdom helps greatly with. Epictetus believed that everything that you cannot control is considered indifferent or irrelevant to living a good life. I like tennis because it's just you out there, unless you're playing doubles, which is a lot more rare than singles. It's completely up to me whether I win or lose out there. I have no one to blame but myself. Stoicism is very much in line with this. The chief good from Aristotle, which means the purpose for which all human action is performed, is entirely up to your control. You are completely responsible for your life. Everyone struggles. I notice a lot of adults saying they want to be kids again. The cool thing about being a kid is just how simple and carefree it was for most of us. But being an adult mirrors self-development, really. It's hard, sometimes way too hard, but if you do it in a smart and positive way, it's almost impossible to not be rewarded for all your effort, sometimes heavily rewarded. As a kid, your life really isn't your own all that much, but when you become an adult, your life really is your own. Blaming others, especially for things that happened centuries ago, for your own shortcomings won't advance you. What is up to us and what is not up to us is a sovereign idea that rules Stoicism. So let's talk about what the Stoics mean by living in accordance with nature. This isn't necessarily the hippie way of thinking about it, though there's nothing wrong with that, of course. I think you should appreciate nature. One way to tell if you're doing well spiritually is if animals respond well to you, usually. Obviously, I'm not saying to go find a grizzly bear or anything like that and try to be buddies with it, live wisely. Chrysippus, a Stoic philosopher who excelled in logic, knowledge, ethics, and physics, believed that there are 2 main tenets of living in harmony with nature. The first is living in accordance with our own human nature, by living an excellent life. The second is acknowledging that you are part of a greater whole, the universe, and that you need to live in harmony with the nature of the universe. So back to how the Cynics lived for a bit. They didn't live like that because they thought it would make them lose weight or anything like that. The Stoics believe there is an inherent value in self-discipline, so just the mere act of eating according to a strict diet for even just a week is not necessarily meant to only make you healthier. The mere strength of will it takes to do that strengthens your ability to do hard things in general. Socrates said we should eat to live rather than live to eat. Though I definitely do splurge on food pretty often, believe me, I am not the best at eating amazingly. Food is a great pleasure of life. I like to experience as much of it as I can, though about 70% of the time I do eat healthy. Obviously, since I'm a teacher of self-development, I have to gradually raise that number as high as it can go while still staying sane so that I'm not a hypocrite. Good time to quickly mention, don't expect your partner to do the stuff in these videos. Let them be. That was one thing I let my ex know. She watched my videos, but I never expected her to do this stuff because I know it's hard. But funnily enough, since I didn't force her, she did do some of this stuff and incorporated it. I'm currently single and certainly no Puritan, but that's fine right now. I'm in a massive transformative stage of my life, and to work the way I need to work right now, which is full throttle, it can be hard to find time for other stuff, though I do make a point to do that. So yeah, don't be like, why isn't my partner meditating, and dump them over it. That's silly. I'm a firm believer in that if you have a good thing going with your partner, you shouldn't mess with it. A true Stoic diet is pretty hardcore, by the way. You should look it up. To the Stoics, developing a strong and healthy character is far more important than developing a strong and healthy body. Though remember, Socrates mentioned that we should strive for peak physical condition. That's certainly a very lofty idea. I like the idea of combining both. I'm not a guy that likes to stick with only one school of thought. I like to get ideas from everywhere. So though I may be Christian, and I did ask some hardcore Christians about this, I'm still allowed to believe in other gods. I just have to acknowledge God as the ultimate God. So I'm a Christian, but for example, I get a ton of ideas from Buddhism. By the way, even if God was disproven, I would still be a Christian. I do not need God to actually be real to find extreme value in Christianity. Atheists always try their hardest to disprove God, but there's intense power that comes to you just in the very abstract idea of God. Just to be clear though, I still very much do believe in God. Many scientists start out not believing in God, but the further they get into their studies, they often get to a point where it seems like there's divine planning for things, and they start believing in God. Nikola Tesla, the inventor of many of our current technologies, believed in God thoroughly. This is not a Christian channel, by the way. There's plenty of Christianity-centered channels out there. If you get time, you should look into Yuri Bezmenov's speech on God and how he relates to nations. Yuri was a former Russian spy that defected and told the USA all of their plans to weaken our country. And they're just one group of many trying to do that. America's really strong. It's really quite flattering that it takes so many groups and organizations to try to take us down. By the way, even if America falls, I thoroughly believe there will be some sort of Neo-America or something, and it may be better. We'll see. Okay, sorry for the tangent. There will be lots of tangents in my videos, just to let you know. To the Stoics, true harm only happens to the mind because the mind is what determines how the body feels. So if you got some deep cut, yeah, most likely it's going to hurt like hell, but you can deal with it. Dealing with it at all makes you a lot tougher after it starts healing. The mind has to be protected at all costs. Scars and damage to the mind are what the Stoics consider real damage, and part of self-development is definitely a sort of therapy, though this is of course not official therapy. I've never been to therapy. I always prefer to sort my problems out on my own, but I find a lot of the ideas of therapy to be a bit too quaint and small-minded. Small fixes will lead to a small life. I'm not saying to not do therapy, do it if you need it, but it shouldn't be the end-all be-all. After you plug the holes in the boat, you want to actually sail the boat. Fix yourself if you need fixing, but have big ideas you want to achieve and work to achieve. You'll be much happier, I promise. If you're already doing that, you're awesome, keep it up. If not, you'll get there. To the Stoics, descending into vice, such as greed, is one way you can really damage your mind. Know thyself. Don't be afraid to examine yourself, to reflect. Do you too easily react to what others say in a negative way? Well, don't. Part of Stoicism is not easily flinching at anything. Are your habits optimal? Where can they be tweaked? Stuff like that. One tweak I had for myself is sometimes I couldn't make it to the gym, so I'd make up for it by spreading out 150 push-ups throughout the day. I didn't always meet that goal, but I at least tried. The self-discipline to merely try is another part of Stoicism. They consider that to be in itself worthy of praise. But of course they'd prefer it, and you'd prefer it, if you stuck to your goals unflinchingly. Then, deeper than that, the Stoics want you to examine your own soul. You'll find that many cultures in the world believe in a spiritual realm, both in the past and present. I used to not care about it, but life is deeper than you could ever possibly imagine. It may not always be good, but it's an insanely interesting world we live in. It's at least very hard to be bored by this world. Knowing yourself is also what separates humans from animals. What's unique about us compared to them? What can we use to succeed? What traits do certain animals have that you wish you had more of? Knowing thyself is also about being mindful. Those who think ancient philosophy doesn't have any impact on modern-day life are mistaken. Alcoholics Anonymous actually uses a Stoic prayer as one of their well-known sayings. It goes, God, give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Stoics believe you should separate living in accordance with nature, the nature of yourself, and the universe into three different dimensions: the self, the world, and mankind. Being in harmony with yourself is the first dimension, the self. Being in harmony with the world and accepting fate is the second one, the world. However, I want to make it very clear I somewhat disagree with the Stoics here. Well, they're probably so thorough that they thought about this too, but anyway. If you did everything you could to save something in your life, but it ends anyway, that seems to be fate. But I believe some things are fated that you don't have to accept. This is actually a very core belief of mine, that even if something is fated to happen, if it's unacceptable, you should try everything you can to stop it. The game Xenoblade Chronicles is all about this, and is one of my favorite games of all time, and my favorite pieces of media always tend to delve into philosophy. I don't really like the surface level popcorn stuff.
Do not be surprised. Everything in this world is dictated by the passage of fate. As all that exists is interconnected, time can flow only towards the inevitable. That is the vision of which I, the Monado, am the origin. That which will be, will be. This was all predestined.
It truly seems as though everything is going as Sansa planned. But our hearts and minds, they still hold the will to seize our own destiny. No matter how hard you try to break us, the future is ours to shape, Dixon. Always!
When will you learn you have no future? Face it! Your destiny is to die here! What? Shoot!
Thank goodness you're here!
Damn kid! So you're still alive!
Alright, moving on. Okay, so this part's interesting and I'll try to expand on it in a future video about Stoicism. So the Stoics believe you should accept fate but also will fate to happen. I'd say the way to interpret that is to accept fate but try to will your actions into the world as much as possible and make your thoughts manifest through action. They also do believe that it's futile to complain. Finally, the third one, remember we talked about self, the world, and mankind. With mankind, Stoics believe you should feel a brotherhood or sisterhood with all other beings on the planet, and that you should be philanthropic or giving to the rest of mankind. We all definitely have our differences, but at the end of the day, we all bleed red. The best way to do this stuff is to always start as small and local as possible and expand outwards from there. Always start small because the first step is always the hardest. Setting things up is pretty much always the most painful part of doing something, but after that is where the magic starts to happen if you do it consistently. Seneca, a Stoic philosopher, is quoted to say, "Man is a sacred thing for man," meaning if you have that sense of kinship with other people, the ultimate preferred action is that which enhances the overall well-being of humanity. Elon Musk hasn't told you this as far as I know, but he definitely follows a lot of Stoic concepts, he just doesn't necessarily say that. A lot of people prefer to keep all of this self-development and philosophy stuff private to gain an edge, and it's totally okay if you want to do that, seriously. Think of it as if we're playing poker. I've seen people who have completely normal conversations with me about the weather, and I would have never known if they hadn't told me they had a philosophy degree. Only now am I starting to understand the depth of all the stuff that's actually going on in their head. Again, linking Stoicism and Eastern philosophies, Stoicism is very much about focusing on the present moment. Think about it like this. Tons of kids buy into the idea that they're going to get a degree, instantly make six figures, and so it's okay that they do their current job badly. They don't realize that they're not building self-discipline and a work ethic by neglecting their current job, and work ethic is one of the most important things you carry with you your entire life. Work ethic means job security. Work ethic means promotion opportunities. Whatever you're doing, there's no point in half-assing it. The half-assing is going to make things way harder for you in the long run. So that's an example of how focusing on the present moment helps you in the future. Stoics were pantheists, meaning they believed in all gods. This is what I am as well, but just remember God is the highest God for me. I don't focus on religion, I focus on spirituality. Zeus, nature, fate, and God were all the same to the Stoics. Epictetus says to endure and renounce. Endure what you're going through, don't complain, then renounce it, meaning let it go, leave it in the past.
Ah, so kid, are you impressed by what you see?
Is that all you've got?
The head leaders of the Stoics were, to no one's surprise, all very physically fit. Zeno was renowned for pacing back and forth in the Stoa quickly as he taught to keep active. Cleanthes, the second head of the Stoa, was a boxer, and Chrysippus was a long-distance jogger. I obviously relate to Chrysippus the most since I'm a long-distance jogger. But of course, since ancient philosophers were a bunch of badasses, they were very interested in mastering the mind as well. So we talked about eudaimonia earlier, the Greek word for supreme happiness. Think of when you're happy with your life and content and you have this calm sense of being. That's a good state to be in, I'm definitely not knocking that. But the Stoics wanted to push it further to see what it would take to get that 7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 happiness to a 10 out of 10. They believed to do this you had to metaphorically become the sage, sophos in Greek, meaning using wisdom to avoid unnecessary hardships, discern morally good and morally bad actions, and as you strive to become the sage you get closer and closer to eudaimonia. The life of a sage lacks nothing of inherent importance, which remember for Stoics, is only contained in your body and mind. Wealth and money were seen as a bonus for the Stoics, but ultimately not a determiner of if you had achieved the form of the perfect sage in eudaimonia. Though obviously money is very important, just don't let it consume everything you do, another thing America desperately wants you to do. Notice on the American dollar it says, "In God we trust." I have a small theory that, since it's on the dollar, it could have a dual meaning, meaning yeah we trust God, but also they could be saying that money is our God, the thing we worship. Are they wrong? I promise you the more aspects of yourself you develop that build strength and character, the more money you'll make. They both directly and indirectly correlate to how much money you're able to make. How well you can conceptualize abstract concepts and apply them also increases how much money you can make and how high you go in life. How bravely you venture into the unknown also determines this. A quote from Epictetus is not just to merely be satisfied from knowing these things. You have the fruit, now get the juice out of it by consciously and purposely applying some of these concepts. Seneca says that the wise man needs nothing but can make good use of anything, while the fool needs countless things but doesn't make good use of any of them. Going back to money for just a second, I do want to be perfectly clear that the Stoics are totally fine with you making a ton of money, they just believe it should be done virtuously. But what's great about Stoicism is it's also fine if you're at rock bottom. Stoicism is a philosophy to go to for enduring extreme hardship. High or low, it's there for you, and so am I. Since they need to be mentioned, the specific vices to avoid for Stoics are folly, meaning lack of good sense, intemperance, meaning having no moderation, injustice, cowardice, and any other smaller vices such as narcissism. Basically, being as angelic as possible and avoiding being demonic. If your values are demonic, you'll start to notice it manifest on you outwardly, and the cat's out of the bag if you're trying to pretend to be virtuous. I don't really get that. If you're going to be evil, why not just be evil? Why all the pretending these days? And if you're angelic, that will manifest outwardly. The Stoics considered the following things to be indifferent or irrelevant to whether you lived a fulfilling and happy life. Life and death, your reputation, pleasure and pain, wealth and poverty, health and sickness, and more. I know what I just said is probably highly controversial, but remember the Stoics are who originally came up with this. The idea for them is as long as it can be endured and you're happy and live with virtue, you're living a fulfilling life. But again, Stoicism is very useful even if you're not happy right now. When your knees are in the mud, sometimes you just have to keep pushing through even though you're certainly not happy about it. But somewhere deep down, you are happy about it in a way because you have the fortitude to even be able to do that in the first place. Again, this is very, very key, so listen carefully here. The Stoics did not want you to be unhealthy. It's just that they believed even if you became very unhealthy by bad luck, you could still be happy. But it would still be the preferred outcome to be healthy if possible. Practical wisdom is a subset of wisdom and translates to phronesis and is all about determining the value of things, such as the things we just talked about back there like reputation and health and wealth. Sure, you can be ultimately happy without them, even very happy, but ideally you'd have them. But just remember, some of the most terrible people have the most money, so it's certainly not some inherently good thing. It's only good when used well. By the way, I don't want you to think I'm talking about our current national politicians when I talk about the greatest evil in the world. I'm talking about the people far above them who very much exist and openly write about what they're doing in books they write. This stuff is not secret. They believe they're absolving themselves from any moral responsibility of what they do by telling you about what they're doing, either through hints in movies and songs and all that, or just openly writing about it. It's not easy to figure out and is very complicated, which is why they're still ruling over us. You have to even know to look for this stuff in the first place, and some people are in such a daze that literally all they do is look at memes. Like, they're funny, but there's just so much more to life than that. Stoics believed that humanity suffers from a great illusion, translated as tufos, meaning the great mist. They believed this in many ways, but one of the ways they believed it is that the vast majority of people value superficial material things over inherently valuable things. But like we just talked about, most people live unaware of what's really going on, and this is also another way that there's a great mist obscuring the sight of regular people. I believe that when you're under 18, your life is not your responsibility, and if you get indoctrinated or misled, that's not your fault. After 17 or 18, though, you're legally an adult and entirely responsible for yourself, and that does involve undoing things you've been taught that are either false or not helpful. I don't get why most people acknowledge our government sucks, but then never question what they do or undo the beliefs they've been taught from the schools that are linked to the government. You need to travel through the mist to the other side. Who knows what's out there, but it's sure as hell better than being stuck in a trance. Maybe the other side is grassy and full of sunlight. Maybe it's filled with a mountain that's hard to climb. Who knows? It's certainly worth finding out, though. Seeking perfection of your own nature is another Stoic belief. Perfection is looked down upon these days, and in my opinion shouldn't be sought out until you're an expert at something, but gradually you can go from bad to average, to good, to great, to amazing, to master, to perfect. Almost no one can achieve perfection, and certainly neither have I, at all. But somewhere out there, just statistically, there has to be someone who has never messed up at their job and has always done things perfectly, or got to a point where they do that. But be careful with that as well. If you're too perfect, people can start to hate you. You still should be able to relate to regular people in some way, but haters gonna hate. So basically, the Stoics believed in the fulfillment of our own true potential. They had a word for this, arete, which means living virtuously, but more so means living with excellence in all things. They actually believed Zeus commanded them to fulfill their potential and become sages. Even if you're a slave to someone or something, you can have some freedom by controlling your mind and body. So say your job requires you to show up to it 120 hours a week, and there are jobs like this that do exist. For example, some residents in medicine go through this for a period of time. Although it's voluntary for you to do that, in some way you're still a slave to that job because all your free time is going to that job. Although that's a very admirable form of slavery, you're spending basically all of your waking minutes trying to advance yourself and help others. This is why perspective is so important. I work a very tough job right now with an over 80% turnover rate, but I realize at the end of the day I'm only doing it 60 or 70 hours of the week, which is definitely a lot, but not undoable. I could always be that resident who almost literally lives at the hospital. Anyway, you could take some freedom back by controlling your mind. The Stoics believed a way to do this was to take beneficial and or honorable actions. When you take beneficial actions for yourself, you're free from what the Stoics would call irrational fears and irrational desires. The Stoics believed that if you succumb to badness or vice or sin constantly, that you're essentially a slave to your unhealthy desires and attachment to external things. Going more into eudaimonia for a bit, the Stoics believed that true beauty resides in taking good and honorable actions regularly. Your body, mind, and soul will become beautiful if you live the good life, according to them. A little more on the virtue of justice. Justice is also about wanting to see other people flourish. If you want everyone else but you to fail, you definitely aren't justice-seeking. Virtue is its own reward and completes people and makes them whole. The seed of virtue exists within all of us. Stoicism says to seek it at all costs, even if it's raining, even if you're tired, even if you're in a bad mood. The Emperor Nero was a notorious tyrant, not to be confused with Zeno, but he was extraordinarily wealthy and powerful. This shows that a foolish man can have all the wealth in the world but still not be living the virtuously good life or benefiting humanity. A quote from Marcus Aurelius or Seneca sums this up well. So this, virtue, is the only good of a man, and if he has it, even if he is bereft of everything else, he deserves praise. But if he does not have it, despite an abundance of everything else, he is condemned and rejected. Epictetus told his students to say, "This is nothing to me," in reference to any misfortune or vice or hardship they endured. This is a great way to go about it. If I'm really struggling at something, sometimes I'll lie to myself and say, "Dude, this is the easiest thing ever, calm down." I'll notice pretty quickly I'll regain my composure and start doing better at it. You may end up preferring the Aristotelian way of thinking, which lists good in order of importance to them. The most important being goods of the mind, like virtues, the second most important being goods of the body, like health, and the third most important thing being external goods, like wealth. A valuable thing the Cynics did was again willingly subjecting themselves to poverty, and when you're broke, you find out your true strength. You just don't want to stay broke too long. Learn the lessons, but live in abundance afterwards. I've hit 5 digits in savings before, and obviously want to hit 6 digits within some years and maintain it, which I could have already done if I had made smarter decisions in my early 20s, but I've been very broke before, and a lesson I learned is no one is coming to save you. You must save yourself. You must take action. The Stoics believe, as well as many cultures, that there is a divine spark within you that must be protected at all costs. You could call this your soul. Even with all the attacks on spirituality in modern culture, so-called experts that often just have that as a false title, trying their very hardest to convince you to not be spiritual, many people still believe in souls. I'd say well over 50%, at least 70 or 80% in my experience. People believe there is something within us beyond the obvious, something that stays after death. And even scientifically, they're right as well. The electricity in us transfers back into the universe after we pass, and we become, quite literally, part of the universe, as we already are. Do not fear death, you are merely returning to the universe. You're returning to that from whence you came. So we used to have this old hierarchy in our tribes that I believe we should go back to. In a good society, we'd go back to this on a wide scale. The very young would just have fun. The adults, 18 plus people, would be the warriors, the people that go out and do great things while helping the weak who aren't capable of doing great things. The middle-aged adults would guide the younger warriors, and the elders would be listened to intently and would essentially be shamans or wise elders or whatever you'd want to call it. But they need to pass some kind of in-depth morality test if they were to take office. The mere act of even being 60 means you survived all the bullshit life had to throw at you, hardships, plagues, attacks from other nations, both visible and invisible, mental damage, everything. Anyone who's made it to 2022 has earned a victory. Not everyone has. People have been dying more than usual. The mere fact that you're even still here is a victory. Something is keeping you here. Hopefully multiple things, and even more ideally like 50 or 100 things. You need to find out what that is and capitalize on it. I know that was optimistic back there, but keep in mind this isn't necessarily an optimistic channel. I delivered some groceries to a 92-year-old on an app I use to make extra money besides my real job. This channel is a passion project that I'll be continuing for a very long time, but it's not my job. Anyway, the 92-year-old told me she thinks the younger generation is pathetic. It stung a bit to hear because she had to be talking about me as well, even though she said she wasn't. But yeah, a lot of older people find us to be very weak. I promise you, that is just not the way to go about surviving this crazy world we live in. You're making things much harder for yourself if you're weak. Aim to be strong. A weak person gets devastated by someone saying they don't like their car or getting insulted. A strong person shrugs off either of those things in 5 seconds. Endure and renounce. Another thing about the 92-year-old woman was she still looked very healthy. I'm sure she had her ailments, but something to keep in mind is it's never too late to get into self-development. You may have decades left that you can make incredible. And it's not like you're starting from zero. You have all the experiences you picked up from life and all the grit that comes from overcoming many hardships. So Stoicism, just like me, is very concerned with practicality. How do I use this in my everyday life? Here's where that comes in. They say you should take appropriate actions or duties according to your beliefs, and the Greek word for this is kathakonta. They say we should do these things. 1. To eat and drink appropriately for a human being. 2. To dress appropriately for a human being. I'll admit I'm not really sure what this one means. Animals don't dress themselves at all. Any clothing we wear is appropriate in my opinion. But anyway, moving on. 3. To get married and have children. If you're straight, of course. If you're not, perfectly fine. Since this is a guide for 2020 plus, I would add, and this fits with Stoicism, to have children in a wise way. It's one of the biggest decisions you'll ever make, especially now. Being ignorant to current events, then having kids is going to make that kid's life a living hell. Just be smart about it. You know that whole bubble of comfort we were in? Yeah, that bubble has burst now. 4. To lead the life of a citizen in society, carrying out the duties of a good citizen. 5. To endure and shake off irrational behavior from other human beings. You certainly can't expect other people to be wise and virtuous, especially not with all the garbage put into their mind now from all sources, so people are becoming pretty nasty to each other. And it's mostly because they don't know how to handle hard times, and some of them may be quietly realizing everything they ever thought was a lie. This is called a worldview shatter and is very tough to handle, so be careful. If you're going through that, take it slowly. Outcome independence is a way of thinking that the Stoics really stressed. A great example for this is job interviews. If you're trying to get a competitive job, you need to be prepared to be rejected 100 times. That probably won't happen, but it could. I've never had trouble getting a job, but I kind of just know how to sell myself. You're already ahead of quite a few people by just showing up to your job on time regularly and doing your job. Then after that, your competition becomes the upper echelons of the job, and that's where the real fun starts. I don't want to try to run a marathon against someone who doesn't even show up to the marathon. I'm interested in competing against the person who's going to give it their best and is read up on running and enjoys it and all that good stuff. But yeah, you can't let yourself get crushed by each job rejection or it's going to wear you down. You have to be free from outcome, though obviously the good outcome is preferred. If you can wrap your head around this, you want outcome independence. As long as you tried your best to achieve the good result, there's nothing that can be done at that point. Just ask yourself if you could have improved anything for next time. But with the outcome independence, you also want to strive for the best results. So if some guy tries to pick up chicks, but one rejection crushes him, he's not going to be very good at picking up chicks. Though I personally have had all my fun and I'm pretty much done with hookup culture and am ready for a stable long-term relationship. I wouldn't pass up a quickie if we're both single though. So apparently the Stoics even believed you can go beyond appropriate actions and duties, kathakonta, to perfect actions, katorthomata, as you ascend more towards living your life in a sagely manner. People from the past weren't feeble, they believed you could become perfect, and if you couldn't, at least try to get as close as possible to it. Alrighty, I have to wrap this up for a bit. This video is probably already very long and I don't want to hit you too hard yet. I don't know the future, but I'll try to never make videos over an hour, but I might. This was just my first video on Stoicism. I'll definitely make more. And keep in mind, if you're new to this channel, this is part of a self-development series. The playlist for that can be found on my channel. I'm not saying this as some form of self-flattery, but there's no way you can only watch this video once and then go apply everything from it out there in the world perfectly. I myself had to read these concepts at least 3 times before I really understood and applied them. The videos will go back to normal for a while, but remember, every 3 or 5 I'll do an intermediate or advanced concept. See you next time.